I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about my work in cultural property law, which is the focus of my research. Um, so today, we will be, this session together, we will be looking at legal history in the basement of a private residence in London. So how does a sarcophagus of a mighty pharaoh buried initially in the Valley of the Kings end up in the basement of a private residence in Lincoln's Inn Field? Surrounded, you can see from this illustration, the sarcophagus here is at the bottom, and this is an accurate description of the location of where it's placed today, surrounded by a bizarre assortment of funerary objects. How did this come to be? And here we see that SETI isn't very happy about it. So tombs in the Valley of Kings are very elaborate businesses. Seti's tomb in particular is one of the largest, most magnificent tombs in the Valley of the Kings. It's almost 350 feet from entrance to end, and it's dug in the mountain, shaft after shaft, with the sole purpose of housing the mummy of a pharaoh to be housed in the sarcophagus. So how does this sarcophagus of Seti, that's supposed to be the centerpiece of his tomb, end up in a basement in central London? So this story is important because it kind of sheds some light on the injustices of colonial rule and some of the tools that enabled this kind of injustice. And we can see how some of that is unraveling today. So to answer this question, we need to start at the beginning. And for me, the starting point is with Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798. So Napoleon's invasion brought around the commodification of ancient Egyptian culture, historical objects, because after Napoleon's invasion, people started to want to own Egyptian antiquities. And this phenomenon was triggered by the scientists who accompanied Napoleon's expedition because they researched Egypt and they came up with a publication that we know as Description of Egypt that had a lot of illustrations of all of the temples and the tombs, and it was published in Europe. And upon its publication, Europeans were instantly enthralled by the astounding imagery. This also coincided with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, which helped decipher the ancient Egyptian language. So the shroud of mystery around ancient Egypt was kind of removed. And interest in Egypt exploded overnight. Everyone wanted a piece of Egypt. So during this era, which is in the early 1800s, we see a lot of amateur antiquarians and adventurers. They descended on the Nile. They're looking for antiquities just to, take home with them as souvenirs. We also see a lot of people who began to realize how much this is such a profitable endeavor because, like I said, everyone wanted a piece of Egypt, and people were willing to pay incredible amounts of money to have a mummy or a sarcophagus in their living room to decorate it. But most interesting thing that happened was that the biggest contenders for ancient Egyptian antiquities were European museums, because at this point in time, European countries were gradually forming their national museums, repositories of their own cultures and of other nations. And there was some kind of competition where they were trying to acquire the best collections. I'm sure you've all visited the museums and seen there's always an ancient Egyptian section in any museum that you visit. So how they came about that, they usually bought the things that the adventurers brought back, or they had handed out double assignments to their diplomats, which brings us kind of to our story about the alabaster sarcophagus. So diplomats had dual assignments, diplomatic assignments, and then they were assigned, they were told to look and export back any antiquities that were worthy of the British Museum collection. So here, back to the sarcophagus, is Henry Salt, who was the English consul in Cairo at the time, who was given the specific instructions to find things for the British Museum Ancient Egyptian collection, and to ship anything that's good enough back home. But being a diplomat, he didn't have the time to dredge up and down the Nile looking for antiquities. So he hired another adventurer here, Giovanni Falzoni, who happened to be an ex-circus performer. So together, these two would look for antiquities. And needless to say, their main interest here was money. So Henry hired Falzoni with the instructions to venture down south, where most of the antiquities were found in Cairo, and to find something interesting. And Falzoni did find something very interesting. So Falzoni's greatest discovery happened in 1815. He stumbled upon the magnificent tomb of one of the greatest pharaohs of ancient Egyptian history. Although this tomb of Seti I had long been ransacked long ago, all of its content clear, there in the middle of the tomb lay an alabaster sarcophagus, which was gleaming white, 9 feet 5 long, 3 feet 7 wide. And he casually and quickly removed it from the sarcophagus, shipped it up the Nile to Alexandria, where it sailed to London, never to return again. Once in London, Salt wanted to sell it to the British Museum because for him it was about money at £2,000. The British Museum felt like this was too much. Luckily for Salt, there was someone else interested. So, and this person didn't have a problem with money. Soane was a peculiar personality with a more peculiar home. A self-made architect in a society that wouldn't let him forget his humble beginnings. He was obsessed with his posthumous legacy, and he meticulously designed his house and handpicked pieces to serve as a testament to his life and work, and arranged with an act of parliament to protect his house and collection in perpetuity as a museum. And the museum, I'm guessing a lot of people were able to visit it. It's in Lincoln's Inn Field, just a short walk from the London School of Economics. And there you can access it and see I have never seen a more bizarre residence. So how does a crypt that was meant to be the final resting place of a pharaoh for all eternity become the centerpiece of Sir Soane's museum? So just to give you back some more information about Sir Soane, he usually referred to his own temperament as melancholy and brooding, and he seemed to revel in everything that was morbid and funerary. He even designed the basement of the museum to be a crypt where he assembled all of these funerary objects, and it kind of makes sense why he saw the sarcophagus being the centerpiece of his crypt, his museum, because in a way he designed this crypt to represent his own crypt, with visitors perpetually visiting it to pay tribute to his legacy. So in this essence, we see how this sarcophagus of Seti was recontextualized from a sarcophagus of a pharaoh into this centerpiece of Sir Soane's crypt, and is often referred to as Sir Soane's sarcophagus. And this is thanks to the fact that it crossed the border, it was exported, it was sold to Soane, and subject to British property laws, he was the new owner of this object, and he was free to do with it as he wanted, whatever he wanted. So he recontextualized it, altered its identity, and in a way diminished its value. So Now that we covered the history, let's talk about the law for a bit. So was Sir Soane's acquisition of the sarcophagus of Seti legal? So as a rule, experts in cultural property law answer this question by looking at the time and place which the object was exported in. This is relevant because in some periods since Napoleon's invasion until today in Egyptian law allowed for trade and export of cultural property. So the export during these periods could be presumably legal. Shocking, not really, when you think about up until 1952, Egypt was either controlled by the Ottomans, the British, the French, or a combination of all three. So let's take a look at the timeline of the legislation of evolution of of Egyptian culture heritage law. So since Napoleon's invasion up until Muhammad Ali's reign, there was no law. So that's 1800s until 1835. And then from 1835 until 1982, which is roughly a century and a half, trade and export was allowed. So a lot of the things that is during this period could potentially be legitimate. And then after the nationalism movement of Egypt in 1883, finally, it was trade and export of ancient Egyptian antiquities was banned. So the sarcophagus of Seti was exported in 1821, so it goes under the no law era. So how did existing legal instruments during this era kind of facilitate this mindless appropriation? So we have two tools to look at here: capitulations and firmans. Capitulations are treaties between the Ottoman Empire and European states that granted European privileges within the domains. And these privileges included trade immunities, immunity to personal property, extraterritorial protection of European laws. And we'll talk a little bit later about what this meant for the Seti sarcophagus. And next, firmans. And I see, probably this triggers some recollection for people here that with the Parthenon marbles, their internal decrees issued by the Pasha instead of excavation permits, and they generally instruct local authorities that they unite in furthering the view of the holder of the firman, or specifically provide for the liberty of excavation, and they look like something like this. And this is an example of legal positivism, or what scholars refer to, that this is a law separation. They're separate from morality, and they put emphasis on the sovereign authority, because obviously it doesn't make sense that to kind of just give away their antiquities because the local authority said so. So in conclusion, Salt kind of operated under this firman that he was able to procure from Muhammad Ali, the authority at the time. And he hired Belzoni, and once Belzoni seized and removed the sarcophagus, it was considered under the privileges of capitulations, private property of Salt. So then he was able to ship it without any need for payment, customs, or any of these small details. I'll use my last remaining minute to talk about why this is relevant today. And as demonstrated by pushing back of the legal firmans used in the appropriation of the Parthenon marbles, today we seem to be on the cusp of a movement that kind of dismantles the consequences that could potentially of this colonial rules and the tools of firmans and capitulations that kind of enabled this casual appropriation. So I'm personally looking forward to see what happens with the Parthenon marbles, because it means that every antiquity that was removed due to firmans could unravel a lot of appropriations that were made during colonial times. Thank you.